Hi, my name is Anna Herforth, and I'm going to do this presentation about nutrition-sensitive agriculture. In the presentation, I'll cover what is agriculture's role in ensuring good nutrition, and what do we mean by nutrition-sensitive agriculture? Also, what are the major pathways for agriculture to affect nutrition? And how can nutrition-sensitive agriculture be operationalized? So what are the key activities for implementation that can be done through agriculture to affect nutrition? And then I'll go through some suitable indicators that can be used to measure agriculture's impact on nutrition and the main recommendations for implementing agencies such as GIZ. So why does agriculture matter for nutrition? Well, fundamentally, agriculture is the main livelihood for the majority of nutritionally vulnerable people. 75% of the world's poor are rural, and most of the people living in rural areas are farmers or engaged in agriculture. So agriculture has a role at the household level, ensuring home production of diverse foods as well as women's and men's livelihoods. But the agriculture sector also has a huge role in providing foods in general, which affects all consumers, and agriculture has the main role in providing that food. Just in terms of clarification, when we talk about malnutrition, it includes both undernutrition and overnutrition. So undernutrition, we typically talk about indicators such as stunting, underweight, and wasting in children, which are measures of a child's growth in terms of height and weight. And also we talk about undernutrition in terms of micronutrient malnutrition. So if a person is lacking adequate vitamins and minerals that are essential for life. But on the overnutrition side, we also have a significant and growing burden in all regions of overweight and obesity, which can lead to chronic diseases such as diabetes. And at the same time, micronutrient malnutrition persists in those situations. So malnutrition really covers all forms, whether it's too little or too much. So just as a brief overview of the causes of malnutrition or good nutrition being the outcome, we talk about it in terms of immediate causes, which include nutrient intake in the form of a diet, and health status. And those two together affect a person's nutrition, because even if you have adequate food and nutrition, if there's a health problem, those nutrients may not be absorbed. And for example, a child may not grow well if the health status is poor, even given adequate food. So the two work together to contribute to good nutrition. And next, there are the underlying causes of malnutrition, not so much at the individual level, more at the household and societal level, which include food security, basically access to high quality nutritious food to meet dietary needs, and care resources and practices. So how, for example, a child is fed affects whether they're going to be getting adequate nutrient intake and whether they're going to have a risk of disease. And then another underlying cause is health services and water and sanitation and hygiene, basically the healthy environment that supports maintaining good health. So usually we talk about the underlying causes of malnutrition as inadequate food, health, and care in shorthand. And these are the causes which I'll go back to, which we're primarily interested in affecting through agriculture. But then underneath these underlying causes, there are also basic causes that underpin everything at the political and organizational level. So where can agriculture contribute? Well, again, at the level of underlying causes, it can affect food security, again, consistent access to diverse, nutritious diets in terms of not only quantity but also quality. It can affect healthy environments, ensuring that the places where people live, especially in a farming area, are free from contaminants and disease vectors. Agriculture very much has an impact on water, for example, which can be very influential in the kind of infectious diseases that are in an environment, or mosquitoes that transmit other kinds of infectious diseases. And then there's also women's empowerment, which is very much affected through agricultural activities, including decision-making, power among women, and whether they are able to earn income and use that income, their time use, and knowledge. So nutrition sensitive is a term that really refers to affecting these underlying causes, as opposed to nutrition specific, which is another term that is used more about the immediate causes. Nutrition specific actions are more things like vitamin and mineral supplementation, or treatment of acute malnutrition that affect those immediate causes of malnutrition. And when we talk about nutrition sensitive, it's here at the underlying cause level of food, health, and care. And also I'd like to note that the causes of good nutrition or malnutrition will vary in any given context. So in one context, the primary problem might be a lack of adequate food, whereas in another context, the primary problem may be unhealthy environments and disease risk. So agriculture can affect these pathways. Basically, this graph shows that same framework that was in the previous slide, showing the underlying causes, food access, care practices, and health environment, and how agricultural interventions can actually affect those underlying causes. So agriculture can affect, first, the availability and diversity of food production on farm, which is very important to many farmers for whom markets may be inconvenient, and they rely on own production as a source of not only staple foods, but also the diversity on their plates. So that's one concrete area where agriculture interventions can affect food access for many people. But then it also can affect the food environment in the market. So the kinds of foods that are available and affordable in the market, and also those food, whether those foods are convenient to people and desirable. Are they high quality? Are they marketed in a way that's desirable to people? That encompasses the food environment, the availability, affordability, convenience, and desirability of foods. And this food environment really constrains and signals consumers what to purchase. So agriculture interventions affect this strongly by affecting what kinds of foods are available and likely to be purchased and consumed. Income is also something that agriculture affects, and it is a pathway to nutrition in as much as it interacts with the food environment. So income is important to purchase high quality food, but the high quality food actually has to be there in the market in the first place to purchase. So income and food environment interact. Income also interacts with women's empowerment, because we know that in all regions there's very good evidence that generally income in the hands of women tends to have a much greater effect on household food security and nutrition of family members than that same amount of income in the hands of men. So who is actually spending that income and on what is very important to how income can affect nutrition. So economic empowerment is one crucial piece of women's empowerment, which agriculture can affect. But there's also the ability that agriculture has to, agricultural development, to free up women's time from drudgery involved in many agricultural activities that can often potentially interfere with adequate childcare practices for infants and young children, such as time to breastfeed or give optimal care practices in feeding. So agriculture has another role in that way through women's empowerment and on their own labor and their own health. And there's also an effect that interventions can have on nutrition knowledge and norms, which can affect, again, care practices and how food is used in the household. And finally, at the other side, interventions can affect natural resource management practices. That has to do with water access and quality. There are many irrigation type interventions that can affect the availability of water to a household, whether there's standing water, again, that may affect disease risk. And these ultimately affect the health and sanitation environment that ends up contributing to health and nutritional status. So these are sort of key areas that interventions and people designing interventions can think about in terms of how to get to improved food access, diet, and ultimately nutrition. Some interventions are better suited to address certain pathways over others. And this chart just shows a variety of investment project types that are used by many organizations. They are sometimes called different things by different organizations, but generally we have agricultural development type investments, such as extension, research, crop production. We have value chain projects that have to do with strengthening links to markets and strengthening quality. We have community-driven development and social development projects that are more at a smaller community level. Irrigation and drainage projects, major area of funding, and projects having to do with natural resource management, forestry, and environmental issues. And the green and yellow highlighting here just shows, it's an indication of where the green shows typically very important entry points for the pathways to improve nutrition that can be done through these investment types. And the yellow is potential contributions that can, if they are given attention and carefully designed, they can affect nutrition as well. And then the blank areas are typically less of a direct contribution, although there may be possible linkages. Every project is different, so this is a general indication. But for example, value chain development projects often affect incomes, but also the food environment, what kinds of foods are available and their prices in the market. So the green boxes for value chains are primarily through those pathways, whereas an agricultural development project could also increase capacity of extension to work with male and female farmers about nutritional qualities of foods produced. So in that first row, there's a yellow box on women's empowerment and nutrition knowledge, because those could be improved with special attention to those areas. The key points to make here is just basically that there's no automatic mechanism by which agriculture projects positively impact food access, diets, and health that leads to nutrition. But there are plenty of potential entry points if one carefully designs projects in a nutrition-sensitive manner. And the vision for nutrition-sensitive agriculture is that it would do all of these things, but that they aren't necessarily always done by the same project all at the same time. And so in this vision for nutrition-sensitive agriculture, a central piece is that it would be designed by context, so that the agricultural investment actually fills a gap. Those pathways to nutrition fill a gap in a particular context. And so these pathways, again, are what you see in the surrounding bubbles around context. And in addition, a project should also target the nutritionally vulnerable, if possible, be in an area where it can affect nutrition, where there are gaps. And multi-sectoral collaboration is often useful, where agriculture can affect, often agriculture projects are designed on the food side of things, whereas a health intervention may be operating in the same area, and there could be some coordination to affect all those different underlying causes of malnutrition. And also having a nutrition objective at the outset and doing monitoring and evaluation to capture impact on that objective is very important as a part of the vision for nutrition-sensitive agriculture. So what's represented here in this slide is actually the key recommendations for improving nutrition through agriculture and food systems. And these 10 key recommendations on a single side of a paper is actually the result of a 2-year consultation process starting with a review of what all the donor agencies had published on how to link agriculture and nutrition. And in looking at what all the agencies were saying, there's actually a striking similarity in the recommendations that were being made on linking agriculture and nutrition. And then these 10 recommendations that arose from that review were vetted and modified by a consultation with dozens of individuals and agencies, mainly through the agriculture to nutrition community of practice. And they may seem very simple and basic, but the profound thing about them is how much agreement that there is on these being the priorities for addressing nutrition moving forward through agriculture. And just to say that 50 years ago, in the Green Revolution era, there was really a consensus on the main thing that agriculture needed to do for nutrition was to increase calorie availability through mainly stable crop production. And that was done very well by agriculture in the Green Revolution. But we're now in a time where there's more consensus about what needs to be done in this day and age, in this context of the nutrition problems throughout the world, than there really has been in the last 50 years. And if you notice, the very first recommendation of these key recommendations is to incorporate explicit nutrition objectives and indicators into the design of programs. So the measurement is really critical for accountability towards nutrition-sensitive agriculture, because what gets measured gets managed, and what doesn't get measured tends to be forgotten, and no accountability is necessarily there. So we can't, for example, say we want projects to improve access to nutritious foods and then not measure what happened, whether those nutritious foods were actually produced and available and consumed by people. So in order to help with this first objective of indicators being central to monitoring nutrition sensitivity, I work with FAO and have been working with the team there on a compendium of indicators for nutrition-sensitive agriculture that really follows these pathways. So there are indicators for each one of the bubbles that can be used. And I've highlighted the food side just because in many, many agriculture nutrition investments, that's the area that's targeted to increase either the availability, diversity of foods on farm or in the markets, thereby increasing food access and improving diets. So those are sort of key areas where indicators can be incorporated into many projects. Often income is a key area of interest for an agricultural intervention, and which is important for these aspects of nutrition, but caution with measuring that and assuming nutrition impact, because again, income interacts with the other areas of food environment and who's using the income. So there needs to be a careful understanding of who's controlling that new income from the project and how it can be used for improved nutrition. Also caution with just putting in an indicator of nutritional status, such as stunting, into a project, because there's quite a long impact pathway between an intervention and ultimately impact on nutritional status through an indicator like stunting. And often just the sample sizes needed to capture that impact would be very, very large, often larger than an intervention even covers in an area. So it's possible to misinterpret the effect of an agricultural intervention if an indicator such as stunting is used and there's no improvement, whereas there may have been improvement in some of the underlying causes, which agriculture is closer to. So it's important to not only rely on a very high-level impact indicator for nutrition, but to actually measure the pathways closer to the intervention. And depending on the nature of the intervention, the most appropriate type of indicators will vary. So I've highlighted the food side. The other side may be very, very important. Maybe a project is increasing nutrition knowledge. Maybe it's doing a lot with water and sanitation. So those will be important in different contexts. But we do recommend that where indicators exist in these areas where they've been validated, to use those indicators where they can meet the need of the monitoring for the project. So this compendium has put together key nutrition sensitive indicators for these different areas of pathways from agriculture to nutrition. For example, in the diet, to measure diet, if that were an outcome desired from a project, there are dietary diversity scores for women and for young children that have been validated as indicators of nutrient adequacy of diets. So those are well-established indicators with a concrete methodology that can be employed in an agriculture project. For food access at the household level, there's a food insecurity experience scale, which is another indicator that's very well defined and can be used in a project. For food availability and diversity, production of targeted nutrient-rich foods can be measured, or diversity of crops and livestock produced, because that often affects the whether a household is able to consume diverse foods. For the food environment, availability and prices of targeted nutrient-rich foods can be measured. If the project is aiming to increase vegetable production and availability, for example, then it can measure whether that's happening in the market. Income should be disaggregated by gender when it's measured in a project. Women's empowerment has several incipient indicators that are undergoing testing, and there are methods that can be used for that, which may be project specific and may differ between projects, as well as for nutrition knowledge and norms, which often have project specific indicators. And for natural resource management, one of the key areas is to look at access to improved drinking water that may be affected by the intervention, but there are other areas as well. So these are kind of some of the key indicators that can be used. And it may be interesting to look at this slide and sort of notice these indicators look probably very different than what's usually measured in most agriculture projects. They look at, say, yield per hectare, for example. So this sort of shows where we're heading with measurement and nutrition sensitivity, and it also shows kind of the gap between what's often measured now and what needs to be measured more in nutrition sensitive agriculture. So to sum up, what can an implementing agency such as GIZ do concretely to improve nutrition through agriculture investments? First, greater investment in diverse nutritious foods. A focus on horticulture, legumes, livestock at a small scale, and fish. These are foods that are relatively unavailable and expensive, but nutrient rich. And there's been underinvestment in a lot of the agriculture sector in general on these kinds of foods. So more investment in those foods can improve their people's access to them. And then better measurement of impact of agriculture on access to and consumption of those diverse nutritious foods, again for the accountability. Because we know that based on current food availability, it's theoretically possible for all people to consume enough calories in the world, but it is not possible for all to consume nutritious diets, even if food were equally distributed, which of course it's not. But even if it were, not everyone could consume recommended nutritious diets. So this map shows just fruit and vegetable supply per capita in the world. And you can see that in the orange areas and even the light green, there's inadequate fruits and vegetables available per capita, even if it were equally distributed. So there's a clear need to increase the access to fruits and vegetables, which are a component of healthy diets. The same is true for legumes as well. And this shows in sub-Saharan Africa. The top bar shows that there's quite a high availability of starchy roots and cereals per capita, about 1,800 calories per capita per day in starches available. But the dotted lines in the purple and green bars show the need for legumes and nuts and fruits and vegetables. And you can see the availability is actually far below the need. And that lack of availability shows up in people's food budgets, because this is Bangladesh and not Africa, but it's the same story, that starches are relatively highly available, whereas the non-staple plants, fish and meat, are relatively less available and quite expensive. So even though they make up a very small proportion of the plate, and the energy source, they make up the majority of the food budget. So increasing their availability, decreasing their prices can help people to have a more balanced plate, a more balanced diet. So as a reminder, food security was discussed and the definition was sort of established almost 20 years ago. And it's that food security exists when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs and food preferences for a healthy and active life. And the Sustainable Development Goals actually reiterate that. Goal 2.1 is to end hunger and ensure access by all people to safe, nutritious, and sufficient food all year round. So food security is really a central rationale for agricultural development, and it's a central reason for many investments. And this is just to highlight that food security is really about consistent access to diverse diets, and that being nutrition sensitive is really actually being a duty bearer of a central rationale for agricultural development. So I'll leave you with that thought, following all the information on pathways and the key recommendations for nutrition sensitive agriculture. And many thanks for your attention.